that's a hard question. Like, what does it mean to be American? I think to be an American, it means a lot of things, actually. It means that you have freedom, that you have rights, that you have a voice in your government. It means that everybody matters, and I like to believe it means everybody's equal, but I'm also not naive. I know that truly there is inequality, but that's what I like to mean. I like to think that's what it believes.
I think it just means to like be proud of your country and your nation, and where you live, and to abide by the rules and be free.
The fact that we call ourselves the land of the free and the home of the brave. But freedom also comes to mind just because as an African-American woman and the history of our people not being free and then legally being free, and then at least in today's time and as it has continued to exist, I think a struggle for continued freedom, even though there's legal freedom, really just the way that I think racial issues exist in our country today and what it really means to be free.
Oh man. To be an American, I think, is to put others before yourself, to realize that we have a lot of fantastic resources here, a lot of fantastic opportunities, and if you have those opportunities in your life, if you're lucky enough to have those, it's your job to pass those on to other people.
Okay.
I think to be an American, it means to have the freedom to say what you want, to do what you want, and to own what you want. I think freedom is one of the sole things that we rely on in America.
I know some people probably disagree with this. I think it's actually changed for the better. Growing up in the 70s and early 80s as a kid, there was still a lot of discrimination. There was a lot of discrimination based on race, ethnicity, sexual identity, sex, gender. And I think we've come a long ways. Now, we still got a long ways to go, but I think it's gotten better in the sense that we actually treat people and with dignity for the most part, and more groups, more people are getting that belief that they can be seen as equal and that they have a voice and a right in our society.
As I've grown older, I think I've gotten my own opinions on the United States rather than my parents' opinions, because I think as people grow up, their parents push their opinions, maybe not meaning to, but they do directly. And so I think I've grown my own opinions and basically learned to believe what I think is right and wrong.
And now I know what it means to be in America.
Oh man, we're crazy. I just think I don't know, I think we're like the first generation to like officially like grow up with like technology like in our lives like 100% of the time. And so I think it'll be interesting to like see how that plays out. I think a lot of things will be like technologically like rooted. I think that'll be interesting to see, but other than that, I think it's a good group of people.
Short term, I think me and most Americans became super patriotic right afterwards. Right after it happened, people were wearing lots of red, white, and blue. People were putting flags out in front of their houses. You could drive through any neighborhood, there were flags everywhere. I think everybody became more patriotic. But unfortunately, that has also worn off. I think we're back to kind of where we were. I think for some people, it was kind of a rise in discrimination against people, particularly people from the Middle East, Muslims, Arabs, etc. But luckily, because of comedians, teachers, good people, I think we're kind of getting back to where we're like, okay, the people that did 9/11 were terrorists, and yes, they were Muslim, and yes, they were from the Middle East, but they were radical, just like there are radical Christians, radical Jews, radical whatever. So in the short term afterwards, I think people became anti that group of people. But I think since then we've figured out, okay, Muslims are good people, Jews are good people as a whole, etc.
My name is Beverly Bass. In 2001, I was flying a Boeing 777 as a captain for American Airlines. It was a beautiful day. We even commented when we were over the North Atlantic what a gorgeous day it was.
I'm Mike Franklin. I was the co-pilot on Flight 49 from Paris to Dallas-Fort Worth. As we're crossing the Atlantic, we have one of our radios on what is called Airborne Common.
Okay, say that again, please. It looks like we lost the primary target about 20 west of Kennedy, and we had...
So that would be a means by which aircraft can talk to one another to try to get updates on weather, winds, turbulence, what's happening.
Say that again, please. Fire.
It was over the common frequency. We heard somebody chirp up that an airplane hit a tower in New York City.
Atlantic inbound aircraft. This is U.S. Air 27. We're receiving orders from our dispatch that a plane has flown into the World Trade Center in New York City.
Oh, okay. Not necessarily alarming or anything at that moment in time.
You know, we talked about it and we thought, you know, it must have been a small airplane. And then about 20 minutes later,
Something came. Came across the radio again that another aircraft hit a tower, and it's my experience from the military that I can recognize a coordinated attack.
all of a sudden we start seeing some of the airplanes turning around, making a 180, which you would never see that because the North Atlantic tracks are directional, they're one way, and nobody turns around on them.
And so my first thought was, hey, Beverly, why don't we consider turning this thing around and taking people back from where they came from? She goes, you know, that's not a bad idea. Why don't you see if you can begin that? As soon as I started to pick up the radio, we hear, we're common.
We tried coordinating a return to Europe with Chinook Control, and they denied clearance.
They're not approving any reversals. And I sat up straight in my seat and began to process. I'm not really worried about what's behind me, like a hijacking type scenario. At that moment, I was truly focused on what my end game was, getting this aircraft and the people on the ground.
I think our generation, like with I said, being talking about technology, I think we do a better job of like stepping back from technology. I think we're really immersed in it and we don't really know what to do without it. So I think like we need to do a better job of like living in the moment and not being so concerned about what's happening all around us, but like living our own lives.
Change about our generation. I think that people, especially at Staley maybe, they feel like Democrats and Republicans are kind of pitted against each other. So I think one thing that I would change is to show that we're all one big happy family and that we need to work together as a nation to, you know, just be a better nation and work together, not think that it's one against the other, and think of it as a whole.
To be honest, a little bit. It's hard not to, especially as a teacher. I'm supposed to be like completely impartial and things like that. But sometimes, you know, I look at people with their beliefs and I may see them differently. If somebody's, say, a very devout Christian, I may view them one way. Or if somebody's a very devout Muslim, or somebody is very pro-Trump or pro-Democrat or whatever, it's hard not to view them and look at them in a certain way. But I also remind myself that we're all Americans, that we're all in this together, and we're hopefully all trying to make it a better place. And so I try to always go back to that idea and say, okay, just because maybe they're not as smart, or they don't have the same religion, or they don't have the same amount of money or whatever, or same political views, they're still human and they still need to be treated with dignity and respect.
I lived through?
Yes.
Oh, wow. I think like early 2000s, like right after like when 9/11 happened and after, because that set a lot of things in motion that we're currently seeing today, just with like our national security and the way we think about other people in this country. I think you kind of see that with a lot of people in my generation. And